Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and exalt him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if only you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Messiah, in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was angry with that generation. I said, they are people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declare that on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest.
There you go. Is anyone following along in Psalm 95? Are you following the words? It's important to remind ourselves that Psalms are songs, right? When we read them in the Bible, we talked about this last week, Psalms are songs, and they're meant to be songs. They're written. In fact, the Hebrew word for Psalms is Tehillim Emet, which means words that should be sung. That's what they call the Psalms. So we've been looking at Psalms. Last week we looked at Psalm 121. And Psalm 120, there's different kinds of Psalms, like there are different kinds of songs. We had a quiz last week on different kinds of songs. And last week, Psalm 121 was a song of ascents. So that was when you're singing as you're walking up to the temple of Jerusalem and you're looking ahead because the temple's up on the hill. So you often see words like, I lift my eyes to the hills, where does my help come from? Or going up, or there's kind of travelling things, so he won't let your foot stumble or fall, which would be great for me because sometimes I stumble and fall. But that was Psalm 121. Psalm 95 is a different one. Psalm 95, right, is a psalm of praise and thanksgiving, right? It's a communal psalm, so it's meant to be sung as a group. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us come before him. And I always imagine this one is if you've kind of walked all the way up to the temple and you're in the temple and you're hearing this choir singing this song at the very start of worship. Let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let's come before him with thanksgiving and exalt him with music and song. Right? It's a great start, isn't it? It's a good start. And Psalm 95 has two parts to it, right? We've read it all through. There's two parts to it. Hang on, let me get my clicker working. Are you ready? So part one is about praising our Maker. I'll come to that in a second. And part two is about obedience or obeying our Maker. So the first one, if you look through the first bit, one of the things that really sticks out to you is that the person we're singing to is the person who created the earth. The mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it. We heard the songs to sing it. The sea is his, for he made it. His hands form the dry land. So we are worshipping our Creator. And that's really important. And I don't think sometimes we sit and think enough about what that means. When we come to church on a Sunday morning, we're not just speaking to God, but actually we're speaking to God who made us and who made this building and who made the nature all around it and who made the people that we've met all during the week and who made the birds that we heard when we were, get out of the car and as we're walking in, and who made the oceans and who made Ulverstone. We're singing to that God, the God who created all things and created us too. We read in Psalm 95 verse 6, come, let us bow down in worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. This is a really important thing. When we sing to God, we remind ourselves who God is and that we're connecting with our Creator. The next thing that we're worshipping our Creator, we've got that. We're all okay with that? Yep, that we're worshipping our Creator. It also tells you how we should worship our Creator. All right? Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us come before him with thanksgiving. You see, when we enter into worship, we should be joyful and we should be thankful. Right? Really, we should. Now, we have to be careful here. It doesn't mean that we have to be happy and doing somersaults and backflips when we're coming into church. All right? That's not what joyful means. Joyful means with thankful hearts, joy, we are being filled by the joy of the Holy Ghost, saying we're coming before him with joy. And we give joy. So we read, come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud. Now, the Hebrew word literally means shout aloud, like you're loud. And I experienced this when I went to Alice Springs Salvation Army many, many years ago. They sang a few songs, and one of them was Rock of Ages, Cleft for Me. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard a room full of Indigenous people singing, right? Sometimes tunefulness may not be the best descriptor of what's going on, but loud certainly is, right? They sing loud. And there was a lovely lady who, obviously this was her favourite song, Rock of Ages, and she came up the front and she sang Rock of Ages from I don't know where she summoned the sound from, but she sang it with gusto because she was so grateful to the God who was her rock. And so she sang loud. And so you never had to microphone. You never had to have microphones in Alice Springs, maybe for the speaker, but it was loud. And I've had other experiences where I've been in loud places where there's been loud worship. And we don't have to be ear-splittingly loud. But it does say there should be a sense of coming from within, right? Something that's a bit more than just a gentleness. Come before him with thanksgiving, exalt him with music song. We're okay with music in the Salvation Army, I feel. I feel like we've got some really good musicians and really good talent music. I mean, you only have to see the International Staff Songsters to know that, right? So I don't think we have a problem with proficiency, but if we have a problem, it might be with where it comes from. And that leads us into the second part of Psalm 95. So we're singing for joy, let us shout aloud, and here comes, we think it's David, but we don't know for sure, his warning. His warning about worship. When you come and worship, and we read from verse 7b, halfway through verse 7, and he said, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Worship is not compatible with hard hearts. It's not compatible with hard hearts. It's really easy to get a hard heart. He says, don't harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Manasseh. Now, this is a reference back, so I'll explain this for anyone who's not sure of the reference. It goes back to Exodus when God has led his people out of the promised land. The sea has been parted. They've seen all of the plagues and all of the things. There's been visible evidence of God leading them through the desert, the pillar of cloud by day, fire by night. They literally can see God over the tabernacle, right? Imagine that. And they start complaining because they're getting thirsty out in the desert. And they said, Moses, you've let us out here to die. We're hungry. We're thirsty. We would have been better off back in Egypt. And God's a bit unhappy about this, but he says to Moses, strike the rock with your staff, and out of it came water, and the place that they called that was Meribah and Massah. So when he's talking about as you did that day, don't harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did on that day at Massah. that was when they started to grumble and complain about what God had done for them, instead of being thankful and happy about what God had done for them. So don't harden your hearts. When you come before worship, you come with a heart of thankfulness, not with a heart of hardness. And the warning is for us too, because the world can give us hard hearts. We have something in a lot of social services called compassion fatigue, where you're constantly helping people and you don't get a lot of thanks back, and you start to become very hard-hearted. Has anyone else ever been in hospital and you've had a nurse that's just really gruff? I don't know the best word to describe it. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean? One of those nurses that kind of comes in and lifts you up and puts the pillows in and all that kind of stuff, and there's no gentleness, there's no softness, there's no whatever. They're gruff. And you find out they've been nurses for 25 years, right? And you wonder whether this was how they always have been for 25 years. And I'm pretty sure they haven't. But over time, they get compassion fatigue. The same thing happens in social services. The same thing happens a lot of the times when you're interacting with people. And part of the reason why is because the thanksgiving doesn't flow very easily in those circumstances. People will take, but they're not always very thankful. We can get hard hearts. We have to be careful when we come into worship. We don't have hard hearts towards God. Right? God hasn't been the source of our angst and our annoyance all through the week, most of the time. Worship is not compatible with hard hearts. The next warning David says is this. For 40 years, verse 10, for 40 years I was angry with that generation. This is God speaking. I said, these are a people whose hearts go astray. They have not known our ways. You can't worship if you let your heart wander. Because this is where worship comes from. If it came from here, it's just lip service. Worship should come from here. God says they tried me, though they had seen what I did. There are people whose hearts go astray. They don't know my ways. And this is a warning for us too. As easy as it is to become hard-hearted, it's also easy for our hearts to go astray. How often do we start following after things which aren't of God? Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. Is that the saying? Think about where you spend the most time. Think about where you enjoy spending the most time. That's where your heart is. Whether it be in front of the television, whether it be with your family, wherever it is, that's where your heart is. God said, don't let your hearts go astray. They have not known my ways. And there's a big warning straight after that. I declared an oath in my anger, they'll never enter my rest. God was so upset with the way that the Israelite people were treating him in worship. He's like, they're not going to enter the promised land. I've had enough. You can't worship if you let your heart wander. You see, there's two things I've learned out of this. The first is this. If you read Psalm 95, God is always good to us. He made us. He's good enough to do that. Handsome as we are. Or pretty as we are. He's always good to us. But if he made the heavens and the earth, he doesn't have to be good towards us. He chooses to be good towards us. He chooses to be kind. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. He's our God, we are his people, the sheep of his pasture. He looks after us. But we are not always faithful. Our hearts go astray, our hearts go hard. But if God made us, we really ought to be faithful to him. Really ought to be. And this here is why we praise God. He made us. He's good to us. We're not always faithful. We ought to be. And praise is a reminder. It resets our hearts. It says, actually, God, I'm putting you first. I want to come before you with joy and with thanksgiving. I want to do that out of my heart. So where's your heart at this morning? When you came in for worship, were you coming looking forward to singing a few songs and sharing some fellowship with people? Or did you come in and go, actually, I want to worship God from the depths of who I am. I want something in me to get out and be shared with God. Have we praised our Maker, or do we just praise his creation? Are we obedient, or are we letting our hearts go astray? Psalm 95 is a reminder of the attitude we have to have when we come to worship. And I think that's why it's set as if it is in the temple itself, saying, come, let us sing. So my challenge for you this week is to sing his praises, is to be joyful always. Pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, because he made you and he's taken care of you and he's faithful to you and he loves you and he deserves all our praise.